Hello, my ad age insiders. I'm back with another great marketing story you need to know. It's February 20th, and this week we're talking how generative AI use in marketing has evolved over the past 6 months and what you need to know before scaling AI use in your consumer facing work. This is Ad Age Insider, where I'm taking you behind the scenes of the industry's biggest stories with the reporters who actually wrote them. I'm Parker Heron. Make sure to hit follow and like this video wherever you're watching. It still feels like a pretty huge risk to go very heavy on generative AI use in brand creative. But at the same time, it's also undeniable that it's happening more and more. And it doesn't seem to matter how many comments that a video or an ad get of angry social media users saying, stop using AI. My colleague Asa Hiken, he covers AI and tech for Ad Age. He's going to be joining me in just a moment, and we're going to go deep on all of this. But what's interesting to me is that he said about 6 months ago, he was worried that he wouldn't even have enough AI generated ads to cover. And now he has more than enough to choose from. So overall, it's a pretty strange moment for marketers. And Asa and I are going to go deep on which brand efforts have succeeded and which ones have flopped in meeting that moment. Of course, we'll be breaking down what it all means for marketers, red flags you need to avoid, and new practices you need to firm up in order to ensure you're prepared for the consumer response. So let's get into it. Hey, Asa, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here, Parker. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to chat with you about AI, and I would just like audible confirmation that you're real and not AI.
I confirm, yes, 100%. But the next time I'm here, I'm not totally sure I'll be able to make the same confirmation.
Ooh, a little reverse psychology. Because at first I was thinking, like, that's exactly what ChatGPT would say to
Mm,
me. And now you've added complexity. So we'll
mhm.
just have to take your word for it. Like I said, I'm really excited to chat with you about AI because you have been, I feel like, the chronicler of AI ads for Ad Age with your weekly AI ad of the week column. And I just thought it would be so interesting to hear how things have changed over time, what you're seeing hit and miss, and get a kind of a lay of the land of we're all talking about generative AI in marketing, but what's actually happening in the ads coming out
Mhm.
versus this theoretical space everybody posts on LinkedIn about. So, are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, how long have you been writing the AI out of the week column?
I think we started it like last August, I believe. It's first gets published in the Emerging Tech Roundup, which goes out on Thursday mornings.
A fabulous newsletter everyone should be subscribed to.
Yes, yes, and there's so much good stuff in that. In fact, that it can feel almost buried by all the other content. We put it at the bottom, and so because of that, we decided to spin it out as its own thing to go out on Friday mornings.
That's amazing. So you've got like 6 months plus of this kind of dialing in on finding some sort of creative use of AI every week. And it's not always like straight advertising. Like recently, you had a bit of something about product placement, and, there are various uses of AI. But I'm wondering overall, to start big picture, zoomed out, over the course of those 6 plus months, what do you think has been like the biggest evolution that you've seen of the AI use of AI in creative?
I would say that the most noticeable observation is just how more frequent it is now. I can remember less than a year ago, probably as late as like last summer, early fall, of just like, okay, this AI generated ads are still kind of like, it's hard to see them in the wild. It's like anytime someone does one, it was like worth like, oh, look, so and so did an AI generated ad. And to an extent that's still the case, but there are now so many advertisers who are using it in pretty AI dominant ways that it's no longer a surprise. And so maybe at the beginning of the series, like 6 or so months ago, it was still like, okay, are we going to be able to find one for every week? Like, what if there's not one? We have to go back. And now it's like, okay, there's at least one, usually a few choices, a few options to choose from for each week selection. Just and I think that just attests to the how the technology is becoming more and more, mainstream for creative marketers.
Yes, and adoption is speeding up. And of course, you're right to point out that like you curate, something notable for us every week in that column, but we also don't see your inbox and probably the amount that you're pitched on the other end. So
Mhm,
that's an
mhm.
interesting read on the increase. I'm wondering too if the real Asa is with us, if you feel AI generated ads have become sophisticated enough to consistently fool you? Like, do you see them every time, or are you getting tricked?
That's a great question that I ask myself, just because I feel like I've seen more AI generated ads than like the normal consumer. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, if I get to the point where I can't tell, I think that says something about maybe how the general population would feel. And for the most part, I can still tell. There are short little instances that I'm a little like, I sort of have to like replay it a few times. I'm like, okay, I'm looking for the tells, like are the physics off, is there some kind of impossibility that is you don't notice on the first view, and then you're like, oh, okay. Like, for example, today I was looking at Samsung is doing a lot of AI generated advertising for their new Galaxy phone, and they're doing it on social media, and they have these sort of like short clips, so not a whole lot you can tell, one camera view, like 7 seconds long or so. And one of them was in a subway, and I was like, "Oh, that's real." And then I was like, "Wait a minute, this is supposed to be AI. I've heard this might be AI generated, so let me like look a little closer." And then I started to be able to like tell, "Oh, wait, that looks like a New York subway car, but I ride the subway all the time. These things are off."
You've mentioned Samsung. I know that there's been a lot of coverage of other major brands that have used generative AI over time. Coca-Cola was like an early user in doing fully AI generated advertising, and Google has done their share of work. There are many others. But I'm wondering if you've noticed a trend of the types of companies that are mostly using generative AI in their advertising. Is it mostly smaller upstart disruptor type brands? Are there a big force of major brands using generative AI? What are the trends you're seeing on that front?
Yeah, I would say that if there is any trend in the category of brand, it's probably around like smaller tech focused brands. I think they just have a more forgiving audience, especially like B2B marketers saying if they're marketing to businesses, I don't think the businesses are going to cry foul on their use of AI in advertising. It's typically like an everyday consumer kind of criticism. So definitely more in the smaller B2B tech focused brands. You get some of it in these more, um, legacy traditional consumer facing brands like Coca-Cola, Progressive, they're all about their TV ads, and we covered one of their ads like sometime in late last year, and it included like the ad itself was mostly not AI generated, but they had animals that were AI generated, sort of like driving cars. And even that got some flack on social media. It's like with those bigger brands, you kind of see more of like, okay, they're dipping their toe in it, but it's still a hybrid production. Whereas the smaller B2B tech marketers those are when the ads are like fully AI generated.
Interesting. So progressive, it was almost like a replacement for CGI.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I don't even know if I would have been able to tell had it not featured a little disclosure on the bottom saying
Hmm.
that like images are AI generated or something like that. But yeah, I think, it was just for a small part that probably would have been CGI if not AI.
Interesting. Well, this is where I wanted to dig in today is where brands are hitting and missing in their uses of generative AI in creative, and maybe what brands can learn from that if they're wanting to up their use of generative AI. You mentioned Progressive getting some pushback. Would Progressive have gotten the same pushback without that disclaimer if nobody had noticed? Like, what are you seeing the push and pull is between brands and consumers in disclaiming their use of AI versus responsibility and transparency, like what's working and what's actually causing upset?
Well, I think it's first important to say that like it's already in the consumer perceptions that AI is out there. AI is being used for advertising, and so some brands that aren't even using it are still being called out for like, seemingly using it.
Mm. As in, like, I think you're using AI, so
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
mad.
exactly. And that's especially, and when I say consumers are calling it out, it's all on social media. That's typically, occasionally there'll be a press outlet that will like pick it up, but it's usually just kind of criticism on social media. But yeah, I think that brands need to, you know, keep that in mind that their consumers are on the lookout and are sort of ready to accuse them of using AI in some manipulative way, even if they're not. So just having, maybe some kind of strategy for dealing with that is really how you should enter this whole discussion. But yeah, I think manipulation is maybe the biggest fear of consumers, being manipulated to thinking something is real when it's not. And right now it's really early in what that manipulation can sort of look like. Rarely is it a human, fully deep fake of a human being, and that's the sort of AI generated aspect. It's typically like something like a background or an animal or something else that's a little more, I would say, like innocuous, but definitely the fear of being deceived, and I think that's like fueled by deepfakes that people see online. That's
Yeah.
a top of mind concern for a lot of consumers. In terms of disclosures, I think that from the people I've talked to, it really is a case by case thing. Some people are like, got to do disclosures. I talked to other brands like Svedka that did their AI generated Super Bowl ad, and they were like, no disclosures. We don't need to do that.
Yeah. They didn't fool me. I would have known.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe it
Sometimes
wasn't
the ad
necessary.
itself is a disclosure.
Yeah, I want to dig more into what we can learn from potential risks and red flags of how to use generative AI. If I were to ask you, like, what would be like the landmark case study in a brand that used generative AI and the reception was so poor and there was so much pushback? Have we seen any case studies like that? Kind of a worst case scenario if I'm a brand planning to use generative AI, I don't want to be like this brand.
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind is the McDonald's holiday ad that went out, yeah, around like November, December this past year, and it was in the Dutch market. So it wasn't like a huge Coca-Cola national TV US ad. It was in the Dutch market, and it was just this totally AI generated ad that had a pretty like weird message of like, the holidays suck. It doesn't suck. McDonald's. Go spend your Christmas at McDonald's. It was just like a really
Done.
weird. I think it wouldn't have
Sold.
hit under any circumstances. But to make it worse, they did the whole thing with AI, and people piled on, and just the word slop was just everywhere, and they had to pull the ad like pretty soon after posting it. So that to me is like the the textbook case of like all brands should want to avoid that.
And what went wrong from that? Like, specifically, I know, like, generally you've described it and we can come to some conclusions, but specifically, what would you point out that really caused that campaign to fail?
hmm well, first of all, the whole thing was AI generated, including the humans, and I think that's a big issue. Is like people don't like to see that yet because it's not. Well, I don't know if they'll ever like to see it, but at this point, the technology cannot like create a exact replica of a real human. There's always that sort of uncanny valley aspect. And
Mhm.
so, I just think that like that was a huge part. You look at these faces and you're like, what the hell is wrong with them? Like, oh my God. Like, and the physics was off, like everything was, it just kind of felt like, these tools weren't they this wasn't even like the latest tool that they were using. It was something from a couple of years ago. So I think it was just like it just felt like really careless, and like they didn't it felt like they didn't even look at it in the review process. They're like, okay, we created it, let's post it. So I think it was really just how obviously low quality it was, and all coupled with the fact that they didn't, save anything for non-AI. All the humans, they're probably like, animals and all kinds of stuff in there that was, entirely AI generated.
Yeah, it puts forward for us as viewers the replacement, AI is replacing me aspect of it,
Hmm.
both in the ad, and then you can extrapolate to what might have been happening behind the scenes as well. That's interesting. On the flip side, I mean, can you think of a campaign that was used generative AI and was a great success, and people knew that there was AI in it and it just wasn't an issue? It did exactly what the brand wanted it to.
Yeah. I think the Kalshi ad from the NBA playoffs last summer, Kalshi is the prediction markets brand. I think it made sense for them because they're kind of a brand that embraces chaos, and prediction markets is their thing. And they created this ad that was entirely AI generated, and it actually looked pretty good, all things considered. It was a montage. So that's another giveaway, is if the clips are like a bunch of, if the ad is a bunch of 3-second clips, I think that it's probably AI generated. But for the most part, it just showed like crazy scenes that, like, things you could not have been real, but it was fine. And it wasn't like totally trying to play it off as like not AI. It was like clearly AI, but it was still high quality. And it really just kind of like, it matched well with the brand's identity as this like purveyor of chaos. And so I think that one worked. And I don't think that one pissed anyone off. I think that was like, I mean, it certainly did. It always does. But I think that, like, if you're someone who is into using Kalshi, I seriously doubt that you were like, oh, no, I'm not going to use Kalshi because they use AI to generate their ads.
So let's do a quick moment to recap. Like, if you're listening to this episode and you're keeping a checklist of what to do or avoid for your AI generated ad, like, so far we've talked about being transparent, where or I guess being strategic with transparency and knowing where that will be valuable for your brand, knowing your audience and making sure the use of Gen AI matches who you're
Right.
speaking to. We've talked about quality will be more highly scrutinized for AI ads, so you're going to have to be more on top of that. And we've talked about preparing in advance for the pushback that is inevitable for the use of AI. Is there anything that we've talked about so far that I missed there?
um, hmm. I think that's more than enough to consider, and that's certainly, I think, judging by some of these experiments, that's more than most brands do consider when they when they run these ads. I think something that I just have noticed is that, like, with the criticism, it's important to take that seriously, but, like, again, there's always going to be people who are criticizing it. And it's really just about avoiding that piling on aspect. Like, there's no way you're going to satisfy everyone. There's no way you're going to, like, satisfy the harshest AI skeptic. You kind of just have to focus on your audience. And if people are going to pile on, then, they're going to pile on. But as long as it's not your audience, then, like, as long as you're covering your audience, I think that's the most important part. There's no way you can cover everyone.
Do you have any other points you would like to add to the checklist before I ask you some wrap up questions?
Yeah, well, you might have addressed this a few minutes ago when you laid out the other talking points, but one thing I do want to emphasize is, like, using AI can look like a lot of different things. And just because you use AI for your advertising doesn't mean you're using it for all things. So, like, some brands have, like, I think it's Dove has like a policy, or at least they had a policy that was like, we won't use generative AI to recreate like human features and that kind of thing. So that leaves a door open for making use of the tool to create backgrounds and some other parts of the ads and maybe even products. But they're saying this is something that we recognize consumers don't want, and so we're gonna, like, let that be. And I think a lot of companies can sort of make the same decision of like, okay, let's use AI to create like a fantastical scene. That's
Mhm.
something that Alaska Airlines did for its regional Super Bowl ad, and it was like a dream sequence, and that's like fine. Like, no one It's not even supposed to be realistic. And so they intentionally did that as opposed to like recreating the human. So just kind of, picking and choosing what you're going to use to generate with AI, and you know, l- leaving the rest aside is a good point to to have.
Yeah, I like that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You
Yeah.
can get the benefits of the efficiency without having to, have all the six-fingered people in the world come into your ad. Because also, I mean, we did see you covered another spot for the Super Bowl that was made very quickly, a regional spot for a design AI platform called Artlist, where it was made very quickly so it could be responsive to the other ads that had rolled out to the Super Bowl and have
Hmm.
imagery that referenced them. So that's another interesting thing is like obviously that one was very AI forward and very generative AI-y, but you can get the benefits of AI without having to do all the rest. I kind of like that point.
Hmm.
As we look to the future, do you see adoption of AI in marketing increasing? Do you see us seeing even more AI ads? You've mentioned they've been a little bit more fringe, but are we now going to be seeing them more and more? Or is it going to be taking more of the path that you just described, where whether or not AI is being used, ads might settle back out to looking like they have traditionally?
Hmm. I don't want to like, I don't like making predictions about it. I just think like there's so many predictions about it, and I don't want to just like add to that circus. But from what I've seen and spoken, and the conversations I've had with marketers, like the excitement, the interest, the investment has only increased and increased and increased. And so, it seems like it's only becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger part of marketing. I don't know if it will ever be 100% AI generated advertising. Like, no idea. In 10 years, will it look like that? No clue. But certainly the tools are going to be used in some fashion from, for the foreseeable future, just because they are giving companies cheaper and faster ways to create ads. And now they're kind of just like waiting for the consumer sentiments to come around. So I certainly think that these tools are still on the rise, and they're not going away anytime soon.
Awesome. Last question for you is just as you've been covering this space for much longer than 6 months, but then also covering the AI out of the week for the past 6 months, what has been the most surprising thing for you to learn about either how advertisers are using generative AI in marketing or consumer response or anything that we've talked about today? What has surprised you the most to find out about all of this?
I am surprised still when major brands like the legacy traditional advertisers like Coca-Cola and Progressive and some of these brands that I knew about their advertising before I ever joined Ad Age. I'm surprised when they use generative AI in their like big TV ads. I just think that like, yeah, like when I saw that Progressive ad a little while back, I was like, is this like I saw it on X first. That was the first place I saw it. I saw someone commenting on it. I'm like, there's no way Progressive did that. That's crazy. Why would they do that? And they did do that. They used AI generated animals, and they had that disclosure on like a live TV commercial. And that was just kind of like, part of me wants to say, "Oh, that's boneheaded. Like you're just gonna, to completely make a fool of yourself." But another part of me is like, maybe that's more. Maybe that's an indication of something that I wasn't fully awake to beforehand, which is like they're charging ahead, they're using it, and so that continues to surprise me that these big brands are using it in these big moment ways. But because of that sort of deeper subtext, I think maybe I will be increasingly decreasingly surprised going forward.
All right. Well, we look forward to following the journey with you. So make sure that you're checking out Asa's amazing AI coverage on adage.com. And Asa, thank you so much for joining me and chatting through all of this today.
Of course, Parker, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
All right. I hope you found that conversation as interesting as I did. If you did like it, please follow Adage wherever you're watching this video right now. If you have any ideas of what you'd like me to cover with other Adagers in the future, Feel free to send them to aapodcast@adage.com or send me a DM on LinkedIn. I want to thank my guest, Asa Hiken, and I want to thank you for listening. I'm Parker Heron, and this is Ad Age Insider. Enjoy your day.